Welcome to The Forgotten Soldier by Guy Sajer, a gripping and deeply personal story of a young soldier caught up in the chaos of the Eastern Front. These are his words. Let's begin. We left the Autobahn and climbed onto a small hillock covered with a kind of spongy lichen onto which we collapsed with delight. We both felt crushed by exhaustion. It was a marvelous day. Less than a mile away, the ground was cut up and crisscrossed by the network of airport runways from which Focke-Wulf trainers leaped into the sky with astonishing speed. Paula lay on her back with her eyes closed, as if she were nearly asleep. I leaned on my elbow and stared at her, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. My head was filled with things to say to her, 1,000 amorous communications, but my mouth remained ludicrously shut. I felt that I should and must say everything to her right away, that they could wait no longer, that I must take advantage of this ideal moment and make her understand that it was idiotic to be so timid. Perhaps Paula was being deliberately silent so that I would have a chance to speak. Time was passing, especially the time still left in my leave, but despite all these considerations, my love for Paula imposed silence. She murmured, "The sun is so hot." I stammered a few stupidities. Finally, in a surge of courage, I slid my hand toward hers. The ends of our fingers touched, and I lingered for a moment at this delicious contact. Then I screwed up my courage so that my breath almost stopped, and Paula's hand was entirely mine. I grasped it fervently, and she didn't try to withdraw it. My shyness had presented me with a problem more taxing than finding a safe passage through a minefield. I lay stretched on my back for a moment longer, recovering my strength. I stared at the sky, overwhelmed with happiness, lost to the rest of the world. Paula turned her face toward me. Her eyes were still closed and her hand gripped mine. I felt that I might faint. In a fever of emotion, I think I told her I loved her. Then I pulled myself together. I didn't know whether I had spoken or not. Paula hadn't moved. I must have been dreaming. Suddenly we turned our heads. The air was filled once again with the sinister sound of sirens howling in unison from the airport to the edge of the city. We stared at each other, astounded. Can it be another raid? This seemed unlikely. At that time, daytime raids near the capital were still extremely rare. However, the sirens were impossible to mistake. They were signaling the start of a raid, and we quickly believed them. Planes were rolling down all the runways, gathering speed. "The fighters are taking off, Paula. It really is a raid." "You're right. Look down there, all those people running to the shelter." "We should get into a shelter too, Paula." "But we're perfectly safe here. It's the country. They're going to bomb Berlin again." "I guess you're right. We're as well off here as in one of those airless holes." The German fighters roared over our heads. 10, 12, 13, 14, cried Paula, waving at the Focke-Wulfs boring through the air over our heads. "Good luck to our pilots. 3 cheers for them." "Go on, boys," I shouted to fall in with her mood. "Go on," Paula repeated. "It's not nighttime now. They'll be able to see. 22, 23, 24, how many there are. Hooray." 30 fighters had taken off and were soaring into the sky. Their tactic was to climb as high as possible so that they could swoop down on the bombers from above and sting them in the back. The Luftwaffe had perfected the formidable Focke-Wulf 190s and 195s, which could soar up quickly for precisely this purpose. We could hear the distant firing of anti-aircraft guns. "And if we catch them that far away, they'll never even get to Berlin," Paula said. "I hope not, Paula." I had already forgotten about the damned raid, which had made me drop my girl's hand. Leaving the fighters to look out for themselves, I was preparing a second attack. I was already quite close to Paula when the roar of enemy bombers drowned out the sounds of the nearby city and overwhelmed us. "Oh, look, Guy," she said, as always mispronouncing my name. "They're coming from over there. Look." With her delicate hand, she pointed to a huge mass of black dots which were steadily growing larger against the pale blue sky. "How high they are," she said, "and look, there are others over there." I stared at the double apparition bearing down on the city and on us. "My God, how many there are!" The noise grew louder and louder. There must be hundreds of them. It's impossible to count, Paula said. They're still too far away. I began to feel afraid, for us, for her, for my happiness. We've got to get away from here, Paula. It could get very dangerous. Oh no, she said, unconcerned. What would happen to us here? We could be strafed, Paula. We've got to find a shelter. I tried to drag her after me. Look, she said, fascinated by the spectacle of danger growing visibly larger. They're coming straight at us. And look at the white trails they make. Isn't it strange? Now our flak went into action. On all sides, thousands of guns were spitting steel at the attackers. Come quick, I said to Paula, tugging her hand. We've got to get to a shelter. The shelters at the airfield were too far away for us now, so I pulled her toward a hollow in the ground beside a large tree. Where are our fighters? Cried Paula, gasping for breath. Perhaps they've run away. There are so many enemy planes. You mustn't say that. German soldiers never run away. But what can they do, Paula? There must be at least 1,000 bombers. You have no right to say that about our heroic pilots. Forgive me, Paula, you're right. I would be astonished if they ran away. The thunder of bombs once again filled the air of the martyred city. German soldiers never run away. I, who had run from the Don to Kharkov, knew that perfectly well, although it must be admitted that German soldiers could fight against odds as great as 30-1, as in Russia, for instance. From the hole into which Paula and I had dived, we were able to watch the avalanche which flattened a third of the airfield and 90% of Tempelhof. The daytime raids were always stronger than the ones at night. On that particular day, 1,100 British and American planes attacked the Berlin region, opposed by roughly 60 fighters. The heavy American losses were caused largely by flak. At least 100 planes were shot down. The German fighters had not run away. Not a single German plane came through undamaged. I can still see very clearly the whistling clusters of bombs falling 7,000 or 8,000 feet onto Tempelhof and the airfield, and feel the earth trembling under their giant blows. I can see the ground cracking and houses bursting into flame, and the oil depots near the field spreading the flames over hundreds of yards. I can see a suburb of 150,000 people blotted out in a blanket of smoke, and with my eyes involuntarily wide from the shock, I can see trees tearing upward from the ground in groups of 10 or 12 and hear them ripping open the earth. I can hear doomed planes roaring their engines and see them spinning, exploding, falling. And I can see the terror in Paula's eyes as she pressed herself against me. Flaming debris was falling all around us, so we made ourselves as small as we could at the bottom of our hole. Paula hid her face between my shoulder and my cheek, and I could feel her trembling, quite apart from the trembling of the earth. Pressed together like two lost children, we watched helplessly. Long after the planes had gone, delayed action bombs were exploding in Tempelhof, where the raid had taken 22,000 lives. Berlin had received a battering too, and its rescue services were completely overwhelmed. The streets were still strewn with wreckage from the night raid, Spandau was still burning, and in the southwest quarter of the city, delayed action bombs were still exploding 15 hours later. Tempelhof was shrieking with pain. When we stumbled from our hole, haggard with exhaustion, Paula clung to my arm. Her nerves were strained to their utmost, and she couldn't stop trembling. "Gilly," she said, "I feel terrible, and look at me, I'm filthy." She seemed to have lost control of her reason. Her head fell back on my shoulder. Without even thinking, I kissed her on the forehead. She made no effort to stop me. I was unable to reassemble the thoughts which had obsessed me at the beginning of our walk. I no longer felt any hesitation about kissing my friend. We seemed to have passed beyond the stage of infantile flirting. I kissed her hair as if I were consoling an anxious child, and saw through her tears the tears of the child in Magdeburg shaking with sobs. I thought of Ernst, of all the tears in this war, and all the anguish. I tried to feel pity and to show it. My happiness was mixed with too much suffering. I couldn't simply accept it and forget all the rest. My love for Paula seemed somehow impossible in this setting of permanent chaos. As long as children were crying in the dust of their crumbled homes, I would never be able to live with my love. Three-quarters of the sky was darkened by smoke from the thousands of fires which were burning at Tempelhof, along the autobahns, and in Berlin. I looked from Paula's blonde hair to the ravaged landscape. Once more, we fell down on the grass. I didn't know what to say to comfort her. When we had regained some of our strength, we walked slowly down the autobahn. There, truckloads of rescue workers were driving toward Tempelhof. Without any signal, a truck stopped beside us. "Come on, you young ones, they need you down there." We looked at each other. "Yes, we're just coming." "Paula, I'll help you climb up." The trucks were picking up everyone they met. One section of the city was abandoned so that another at least might be saved. We worked for hours, pulling out the wounded. The Hitlerjugend from a nearby hostel volunteered for the most dangerous jobs in search of heroism. Many of them were killed, disappearing in the torrential collapse of burning timber frames. We managed to find a refuge late that night in an apartment that had been three-quarters destroyed. Dizzy with fatigue, we collapsed onto a bed and lay there, too tired to speak, staring into the darkness with wide-open eyes. Thousands of luminous butterflies seemed to be dancing in front of us. They looked as solid and tangible as living creatures. My retina, stamped with the lights of the fires, continued to light my inner vision. One of Paula's hands twisted a button on my dusty tunic. "Annette, do you think we can sleep here?" she said. "I don't know, but anyway. If anyone found us here, we might get into trouble." What could she be thinking of? "I don't care, I'm too tired." Paula, who was sucking one of her skinned fingers, said nothing. I slid my hand under her head and, fully prepared to affront God or the devil, pulled her to me, kissing her passionately as her torn hands stroked my hair. We were trying to catch up with what life had denied us that afternoon, but quickly succumbed to sleep, overcome by exhaustion. We spent all next day cleaning up. It took about a week to restore some kind of functional order. However, in the evening, we were relieved by fresh volunteers, who had been rounded up so that the first group could return to their usual occupations. Luckily for me, I was not impressed into any obligatory duties, although as a soldier on leave I was not involved in any essential activities. 2 more days went by, during which I hardly left Paula's side. Every morning I brought a fresh supply of chocolates and cigarettes from my father's package for us to consume together. The capital was binding up its wounds and burying its dead. Long funeral processions twisted through the streets. The heroic city was returning to its usual productive rhythm. I only had 5 days left and felt oppressed and anguished by the prospect of departure. Paula, who dreaded it as much as I did, tried to fill my mind with other thoughts. Luckily, there were no further raids. The Neubachs had lost all their windows and had to repair a section of their roof. 3 bombs had fallen only 150 yards away, on the square, which now looked like a street in Minsk. Paula's mother, whom I had met, began to think it rather strange that her daughter never left my side. We met every evening as well as every day, but she took the times into account and raised no objection. Paula, who had more money than I did, took me to the movies one evening. We saw a film called Immense Sea, based on a poem about water lilies. We lived this way until the day of my departure. I was due at the Silesian station at 7 in the evening. The Neubachs were touching in their expressions of goodwill when I said goodbye to them. They understood that I wished to spend my last hours with the girl they considered my fiancée. Frau Neubach insisted on giving me a heavy pullover which had belonged to Ernst. Her husband gave me cigars, soap, and 2 boxes of tinned food. They both embraced me and made me promise to come and see them on my next leave. I assured them I would, and that I'd send them my news from time to time. I asked them to look out for Paula. "You love her, don't you?" Frau Neubach asked me gently. "Oh yes, Frau Neubach." Despite an attempt at calm, my voice rang with emotion. I kissed them both and left. At the reception center, the Feld gave Paula permission to go up to the dormitory with me and help me pack. I could feel my throat knotting with sorrow. How long would it be before I saw Paula again? We repeated over and over again how much we loved each other and began to feel somewhat calmer. I would certainly have another leave in 3 or 4 months, and Paula, of course, would wait for me. She swore that she would write to me every day, that soon we would belong to each other, that we would marry. Her warm lips murmured this to me 1,000 times as we kissed. The war must end soon. It can't go on like this. We can't have another horrible winter like the one last year. Everyone had suffered more than enough, and the fighting would have to stop. We felt sure of it. We arrived at the Silesian station to find that the departure platform had been moved to another position half a mile away because of bomb damage. Paula walked beside me, smiling despite her emotion. She was carrying a package which she wanted to give me at the last minute. The platform was decorated with pennants and flags to salute the long line of men returning to the east. We stopped beside the first carriage of the Poznan train. I shoved my bulging sack inside and turned back to catch a moment of unguarded sadness on Paula's face. "Don't be sad, beloved. I love you so much." I stood for a long time, holding her hands, unable to think of anything else to say. I longed to hold her in my arms, but this was forbidden in public. People walked by, talking. The cement platform rang with the sound of the metalled boots of fellows in the same position as myself. But my eyes were glued to Paula. I was oblivious of everyone and everything else. The hour of departure had almost arrived. A shiver ran through my body and made my hands tremble. A station master in a red cap was walking down the platform, calling out the stops ahead. Poznan, Warsaw, Lublin, Lvov, Russia. These words crushed my sense of happiness. I braced myself for the whistle which would interrupt our last moment. "Paula!" The station master continued his list of distant destinations. "Paula, what would it have been without you?" "Auf Wiedersehen, mein Lieber," Paula whispered in tears. "Paula, I beg you, don't cry, please. You know I'll be back soon." "Ich weiß, mein Lieber. Auf morgen Gile." A section was tramping by on the other side of the track, singing gaily, "Erica, we love you, Erica, we love you, and that's why we'll come back, and that's why we'll come back. You see, Paula, even the song says so. Listen." I felt overwhelmed by the words. I would come back only for Paula. That's what the song meant to say. Then the whistle demolished my sense of joy. I pulled Paula to me and embraced her wildly. "Einsteigen, los, los, Reisende einsteigen, Achtung, Passagiere einsteigen, Achtung, Achtung." I love you, Paula. We'll see each other soon. Don't be sad. See how beautiful it is today. We can't be sad. Paula was inconsolable, and I felt that I was going to burst into tears myself. I kissed her for the last time. The couplings of the carriages clashed. The train was beginning to move. I jumped onto the step of the carriage. Paula clung to my hand. The train slowly gathered speed. Many of the people standing on the platform were crying, and soldiers leaning halfway out the windows were still hanging on to someone's hand or kissing a child. Paula ran beside us as long as she could. Then she had to let go. "See you soon, my love." The day was so beautiful, we should have been leaving for a day in the country. I stood on the step for a long time, watching the outline of my beloved growing smaller and smaller, and finally disappearing forever. I will soon come back, Paula. But I never went back. I never saw Paula again, or Berlin, or Killerringstrasse, or the Neubachs. Paula, we'll be married, I swear it. But the war prevented me from keeping my word, and the peace made it lose all its value. France reminded me of that severely enough. So please forgive me, Paula. It wasn't all my fault. You knew the misery of war too, and fear and anguish. Perhaps, and I wish it with all my heart, perhaps you also were spared. That at least would allow us both to remember. The war destroyed Berlin and Germany and Killerringstrasse, and perhaps the Neubachs too, but not you, Paula. That would be too horrible. I have forgotten nothing. Whenever I close my eyes, I relive our marvelous moments, and hear once again the sound of your voice, and smell your skin, and feel your hand in mine. That concludes the 15th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe for more episodes and leave a comment.